Hello, today we'll be showing you what you need to know before using the DMMME laboratories. This is a laboratory safety orientation on personnel, protocols, rules, and regulations for DMMME laboratory users. There are several aspects that must be considered before one can use the laboratory facilities of the department. The first thing to consider is who are allowed to use the laboratories. All students, researchers, faculty, and staff will be required to secure permission to use any DMMME laboratory unless scheduled for a class by the instructor. In order to access the lab, the user must surrender the approved lab permit to the assigned technician. He or she will also be responsible in maintaining the upkeep of the lab workspaces that is being used. Each laboratory has an assigned technician who assists lab users in the use of the lab upon presentation of a permit or an authorization pass. He also ensures that the facilities are in good working condition. Since the technicians are attending to the needs of the lab, he is also the first to respond to incidents or issues in the laboratory and reports directly to the faculty in charge or the FIC. The FIC, or the faculty in charge, is the authority that approves or denies the request for lab use or equipment use. He or she also ensures the availability of the equipment and the workspace by proper scheduling and regulation of the number of users per equipment and per laboratory at any given time. He or she also identifies the workspace and storage area that may be used. Additionally, the FIC develops and implements policies and protocols for the laboratory. So how do you gain access in the laboratory if you are working outside regular class hours?
So the laboratory permit for the DMMME laboratories is now online. For you to access this, please go to http://tinyurl.com/DMMME lab. Again, that's http://tinyurl.com/DMMME lab. Please note that this online facility is only in its beta stage. So for any trouble, please bear with us. Thank you. So once you access this form, please fill it out completely and filling in all the necessary information so as to facilitate your lab request. Make sure to submit 3 working days before schedule for us to have sufficient time to process your request. Cancellation of reservations should be made at least 1 working day before the approved date of use. You must send an email personally to the lab FIC to cancel your reservation. Failure to do so will result in a 2-week suspension of laboratory privileges. And finally, please review the other laboratory guidelines and protocols before making any laboratory request. Again, just go to the website and fill out the form. So here's a flowchart for the reservation of your laboratory access. You file first a request using the online module as shown in the previous slide. An email will be sent by the online facility to your supervisor, and the instructions will be provided to him or her. If your supervisor endorses your request, proceed to the next step. But if not, an email will be sent to you regarding the non-endorsement of your lab request, and thus you cannot use the laboratory since your supervisor did not agree. Again, if your supervisor has agreed to your request, an email will now be sent to the faculty in charge of that laboratory. Instructions will also be provided in that email. If the laboratory FIC approves, then an email will be sent to you regarding the approval of your lab request. A PDF file will be attached to that email, and that PDF file is now your lab permit. The online calendars that show the usage of the laboratory will also be updated. If the laboratory use is not approved, then an email will be sent to you regarding the denial of your request. Make sure to print out 2 copies of your laboratory permit, as shown in the following slide. Your approved lab permit will be sent to your email address. Print this out and show to the technician or supervisor in order for you to access the laboratory.
The request to use Laboratory Facilities Form or Lab Permit will be made available in the DMMME Building Admin Office. It is a 2-page form that must be accomplished completely by the requesting party for each laboratory being requested. The user must also seek the endorsement of the instructor of the class or supervisor of the project to ensure that activities are authorized and duly noted. Use of project-acquired equipment will require approval of an authorized project staff and his or her signature at equipment to be used, Part 2 of the laboratory permit.
Here are the regular laboratory work hours. For undergraduate students, work hours are from Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. For graduate students, work hours are from Mondays to Fridays, 6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. For project staff with researcher passes, work hours are from Mondays to Saturdays, 6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Beyond this time, the user or users must secure permission from a UP employee to supervise their activities in the DMMME facilities for the entire period of usage. The supervisor is responsible for whatever the actions of the lab users during the time period of the reservation. He or she will also act as the first responder in case of an emergency. Users without supervisors will be asked to leave the premises immediately.
For a list of FICs and technicians, please refer to this slide and the ones posted in the laboratories. The Laboratory Faculty in Charge Committee will be posting a list of FICs and technicians at the front of every laboratory for your reference. All users who access the laboratory must log at the log sheet provided for each laboratory with their complete name, time in, time out, purpose, and signature. This will allow monitoring of the users responsible for the laboratory in case incidents arise. We will now be discussing laboratory practices. Good laboratory practices, when done, will ensure in safe, efficient, and orderly laboratory use. First of all, there is the equipment use log sheet. This is a piece of documentation that is necessary to monitor the history of the equipment. All users, such that all members of the group present during the experimentation, not just the users of the equipment per se, must log accurately. Any equipment issues must be indicated in the remarks column and reported to the technician. A job request order protocol is accomplished by students, staff, and faculty members before requesting a technician to provide any form of assistance. The requesting party must also accomplish a feedback form after the task has been done. This is an example of a job request order protocol form. These are available near the technicians. Users of DMMME laboratories must follow the rules that are set by the Lab FIC and the Lab FIC committee. Otherwise, their privileges of using the laboratory may be suspended. Approval of laboratory permits requires users to follow all rules specific to that laboratory. And these general laboratory rules: violation of any of these rules, negligence in the use of the laboratory, non-appearance during scheduled time of use, extension beyond approved schedule, failure to return countersigned permit, among others, will result in suspension of access to any DMMME laboratory for the next 2 weeks. Now, we'll be talking about who has the priority to access a certain laboratory. The priority in lab use, first and foremost, will be given to project researchers, especially when we're using project acquired equipment. Next in line would be the instructional laboratory classes. Third would be graduate research students. And finally, undergraduate research students. This is the hierarchy that will be followed when prioritizing different users in the use of a laboratory. Also remember that if there's no class and there's no lab permit, there will be no usage of that particular laboratory. We will now be talking about how to store materials inside the laboratory. Users must label all materials and samples stored in the laboratory with the name of the owner, class or project, instructor, advisor, or supervisor, semester enrolled in, and date prepared. Samples without proper labels will be discarded. In case a student needs a storage space in the laboratory, he or she must ask permission from the FIC. Students performing laboratory activities for thesis will be required to personally dispose of their laboratory materials, including chemicals, personally. Non-compliance will result in the denial of their thesis lab clearance. After the use of a laboratory, users have the following post-lab duties. Users must clean workspaces, wash glasswares, dispose of wastes properly, and return tools or equipment to their proper storage areas before leaving to maintain the upkeep of the laboratory. Waste reagents used outside laboratory classes must be submitted to the technicians to be disposed of properly, with a corresponding fee to be paid to DMMME. Users must also switch off utilities and lock the doors if they are the last to leave the laboratory beyond 5 p.m. and must inform the supervising personnel and or the guard on duty. The user must return Part 4 of the lab permit to the FIC within 2 working days from the end of use. Let us now talk about reducing laboratory incidents to zero.
Let's make it a goal to reduce incidents in the laboratory to zero. Report all of the incidents and issues to the instructor or supervisor and experiment foreman. As for the instructor, supervisor, or foreman, they should take appropriate action. Locate the first aid kit, eye wash, or emergency shower, and use as necessary. The responding faculty and technician must also prepare an incident report with the individuals involved and submit to the faculty in charge within 48 hours after the incident. In case of an emergency, these are the numbers that you need to take into consideration. It's now easy to call 911 for any emergency, but here are the other numbers that you need in case you need a specific number or you need a specific agency to contact.
Now, let us talk about the laboratory clearance that each student must accomplish. A laboratory clearance must be secured at the end of each semester for each laboratory class in which the student is enrolled. Undergraduate and graduate thesis students will also be required to secure a thesis clearance before his or her grade is submitted. Otherwise, the student will be held accountable at the end of the semester. Project staff will also undergo a laboratory clearance at the end of his or her contract prior to the issuance of a certificate of employment. Let us now discuss how to operate inside a laboratory, or the laboratory standard operating procedure. Before starting your laboratory work, do familiarize yourself with the hazards of your materials, equipment, and chemical agents. And also, please memorize their prescribed safety procedures according to the MSDS. Learn emergency spill procedures and the appropriate adsorbents or absorbents, and note the emergency contact information and how to report any incident. Also, identify the designated escape routes. You may recall the emergency preparedness orientation, and you must also know the location of the fire extinguisher, eye wash, shower, first aid, and spill kits. To know the location of these, you may ask the laboratory technician or your instructor. While working inside the laboratory, you must wear the prescribed personal protective equipment or PPE. You must restrain long hair and loose clothing and avoid wearing pieces of jewelry. You must follow universal precautions and always handle unknowns as if they are hazardous. Any volatile chemicals must be handled inside a fume hood, and when transferring chemicals, you must use mechanical transfer devices such as pipettes. Before leaving the laboratory, please identify and dispose waste materials and reagents properly. Wash and decontaminate your work surfaces, your equipment, and your glassware. Set all equipment to off or their initial setting. Return the tools and equipment to their proper storage areas. And finally, to remove any residual chemicals, wash your hands and your arms. Remember, you must always bring the MSDS of chemicals and reagents that you will be handling. Label all materials and samples stored inside the laboratory with the name of the owner, class, instructor or advisor, semester enrolled in, and date prepared. Samples without proper labels will be discarded. In case a student needs a storage space inside the laboratory, he or she must ask the permission of the faculty in charge or the FIC. Always remember, do wear personal PPE, protective equipment, bring printouts of material safety datasheet or MSDS, and always log use of your equipment or laboratory space. Never wear earphones, do not eat or smoke or drink inside the laboratory, and do not leave your experiments unattended. There should be no hanging out or horseplaying inside the laboratory, especially when conducting an experiment.
Let's talk about personal protective equipment or PPE. Know the appropriate PPE for the activity that you are supposed to do. Some laboratories may have stricter PPE requirements, especially for specific activities. Ask your instructor, supervisor, or laboratory faculty in charge about it.
In order to protect your head, you must wear a designated head protection gear. This will be required when objects may fall from above and strike you from the head, where you may bump your head against fixed objects like pipes and beams, or whenever your head may come into contact with electrical hazards such as wires. Head protection typically consists of a hard hat, which consists of four different kinds: Class A, B, C, and the bump hats. Eye and face protection is also required when you will be exposed to flying particles or shrapnel, molten metal, liquid chemicals, acids or caustic liquids, chemical gases or vapors, potentially infected material, and potentially harmful light radiation. Examples of eye and face protection include goggles or safety spectacles. Also, when working with very high temperatures or production of light, welding shields can protect from heat, intense light, sparks, metal splatter, and slag chips. And also, face shields can protect against dust and hazardous liquids. Hand and arm protection may also be required. Gloves or sleeves may be worn when exposed to different kinds of chemicals. There are four main kinds of gloves or sleeves: general duty, sharp objects, for cuts, and for chemicals. You may also look at the resistance of each glove or sleeve on this table. Remember to select a glove made out of a material that will resist the chemical shown. Foot and leg protection may be required whenever your foot may be injured. Shoes and boots are examples of foot and leg protection, and always remember that inside the laboratory, slippers, sandals, and open-toed shoes, and also high heels, are not allowed. Different kinds of foot and leg protection include steel-toed shoes, metatarsal guards, and chemical-resistant footwear. Protective clothing materials for your laboratory gowns and smocks include Tyvek, Cyranex, polyethylene, PVC, neoprene, butyl rubber, Nomex, Kevlar, and many others. When working in a very high noise environment, such as in a plant, you may opt to use hearing protection. Sometimes, this is not an option. Examples of hearing protection include earplugs, and you may see also the proper fit for a particular earplug, and also earmuffs. Now let's talk about handling chemicals. When using chemicals, always prepare a material safety data sheet or MSDS or product safety data sheet or PSDS. And also remember to read the label first. A typical MSDS will contain information about the reactivity of that chemical, the fire hazard, the toxicity, and any other special requirements when handling this particular chemical. It will also show how to do first aid in case of an incident involving the chemical. Your MSDS will also contain some chemical information such as the reactivities, densities, etc. You must also know the hazardous materials identification system, which has ratings for health, flammability, physical hazard, and the level of protection needed to handle the chemical. The color bar is not used for emergencies and is simply used to convey broader health warning information. 0 is indicated for no to minimal hazard, and 4 for extreme or severe hazard. A white bar indicates what PPE must be used when working with the material. The NFPA 704 standard system for the identification of the hazards of materials for emergency response is colloquially called the fire diamond. Blue represents the health hazard or the toxicity, red is the flammability, yellow is the chemical reactivity, and white is for special codes for unique hazards. And again, 0 is for no risk, and 4 for severe hazards. And there are some other symbols that you may encounter. The skull and crossbones represents toxic, dangerous to the environment shows a barren landscape, corrosive shows a hand and a piece of metal attacked by acid, flammable shows a flame, irritant is an X, oxidant is a O surrounded by flames, explosive is an outward exploding bomb, and a biohazard symbol. Remember to use these symbols to identify the level of protection that you must need when using a particular piece of equipment. There are things to know when dealing with flammable or explosive materials. The first is the flash point, which is known as the lowest temperature at which a flammable or explosive material can form an ignitable mixture with air. The LEL, or the lower explosion limit, is the limiting concentration of a gas or vapor needed for the gas to ignite and explode. Also, the reactivity of the chemicals will also be shown, and this shows you the chemicals that react when come into contact with other chemicals such as air, water, or oil. Corrosives are materials that are highly reactive and that cause obvious damage to living tissue. Good safety practices are inspecting your work area daily, being an observer, staying alert for any incidents, good housekeeping, remember to always clean as you go, and the best safety device is not any piece of equipment, but rather your brain. You must learn to think about probable incidents. And if you're not sure, ask someone. Report all incidents, injuries, illnesses to the instructor, technician, or foreman. Again, do not wear earphones, eat, smoke, or drink, or leave experiments unattended. And there should be no hanging out or horseplay. Violators may be asked to leave the laboratory. Electrical safety is needed especially when we're dealing with large pieces of equipment using high power electrical sources. So whenever you're working with an electrical machine or equipment, you must know what grounding is. Grounding is the protection from electric shock. A ground is simply a conductive connection between your electrical circuit or equipment and the earth or ground plane. Your ground creates a low resistance to the earth where current will pass through. Always remember, for electrical safety, to plug power equipment into wall receptacles with power switches in the off position. Remember to unplug electrical equipment by grasping the plug and pulling. Do not pull or jerk the cord to unplug the equipment. And do not drape power cords over hot pipes, radiators, or sharp objects. Also, check the receptacle for missing or damaged parts. Also check for frayed, cracked, or exposed wiring on equipment cords. Then finally, do not plug equipment into defective receptacles. Whenever someone suffers from electrocution, do not touch the victim unless you are sure that he is no longer in contact with electricity. If possible, turn off the source of electricity. And if this is not possible, use a non-conductor such as a wooden broom, a monoblock chair, rubber mat, rope, etc. to separate the victim from the source. Always remember that safety always comes first and that safe way is the best way.